HOA Karen installs spike strips on my driveway. Didn't know she'd end up in handcuffs. Daniel had just returned from a grueling day at work, his truck humming as it rolled into the quiet cul-de-sac. The sun was dipping low, painting the street in golden haze. His kids sat in the back seat, chattering about school, when suddenly, pop-up, the vehicle jolted violently. The steering wheel yanked from his grip, and the unmistakable hiss of air filled the air. Heart pounding, Daniel slammed the brakes. He stepped out to find both front tires shredded, metal spikes glinting beneath scattered leaves. His children's frightened voices echoed inside the truck, asking if they were safe. His wife, rushing out from the porch, froze in horror at the sight. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some whispering, others too nervous to come out. And there, across the street, stood Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the Homeowners Association, arms crossed, smirk curling her lips. This wasn't an accident. Daniel knew it instantly. Someone had planted those spikes deliberately, right where his family would drive in. Rage surged through him, but so did dread. If this had happened just minutes earlier, when his youngest son was still pedaling his bike on that driveway, the outcome could have been unthinkable. The sabotage was no longer about rules or petty fines, it was a direct attack on his family's safety. Karen had always seen herself as queen of the block. She wasn't officially elected, she simply pushed her way onto the HOA board and bullied her way into power. At first, Daniel brushed off her complaints. His lawn was too long, his holiday lights were too bright, his kids' laughter too loud. Petty rules were her arsenal, and most neighbors bowed to avoid her wrath. But Daniel refused. He paid only legitimate dues, ignored her bogus fines, and carried on with life. That made him an enemy in her eyes. For months, she chipped away at him, letters in the mailbox, snide comments at meetings, and reminders posted on his door. Slowly, her tactics escalated from words to actions. One morning, Daniel found his garbage can mysteriously tipped over with trash scattered down the street. Another night, his porch decorations were unplugged, wires coiled neatly like a warning. He had a feeling it was her, but no proof. Karen's power came from invisibility, she manipulated without leaving fingerprints. Yet, the spike strips were different. They weren't passive-aggressive hints. They were deliberate, malicious, and dangerous. For the first time, Daniel understood. Karen wasn't just enforcing her twisted version of order. She was waging war. The next morning, the air in Daniel's home felt heavier. His kids refused to step near the driveway, their bikes abandoned by the garage. His wife couldn't hide her worry, glancing out the window every few minutes as though more traps might appear. Even Daniel felt his chest tighten every time he looked at the ruined tires. The jagged steel teeth of the spike strip still embedded in rubber. The damage wasn't just financial, though. The repairs cost him dearly. It was emotional. The driveway, once a symbol of homecoming, now looked like a battlefield. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, the thought gnawed at him. What if his children had been playing there? What if a neighbor's pet had wandered across? Karen's cruelty wasn't just about inconvenience, it was reckless endangerment. He replayed the smirk on her face over and over. She wasn't hiding it anymore. Fear began to creep in. Every creak outside sounded suspicious, every shadow too deliberate. The once peaceful cul-de-sac had turned into a place of paranoia. Daniel realized Karen wasn't satisfied with fines or intimidation. She wanted submission, and if she didn't get it, she was willing to put his family in danger. That thought made him angrier than ever. Determined to resolve things legally, Daniel attended the next HOA meeting. He walked in with photos of the destroyed tires, the spike strips laid out on the table like evidence in a courtroom. But as soon as he spoke, Karen twisted the narrative. She leaned forward, feigning shock, and suggested Daniel had planted the strips himself for sympathy. Her allies on the board nodded along. The gaslighting was infuriating. Instead of support, Daniel felt the weight of eyes on him, neighbors, whispering, shifting uncomfortably, unwilling to confront Karen. The board refused to take action, claiming lack of proof. Daniel protested, his voice shaking with anger, but it only gave Karen fuel. She smiled sweetly and told him to keep emotions in check. He left humiliated, his evidence dismissed, his reputation smeared. At home, his wife tried to reassure him, but he saw the doubt in her eyes too. Could they really win against someone who controlled the very system meant to protect them? It was then Daniel understood. Karen wasn't just one person. She was the embodiment of unchecked power, backed by fear and silence. And if he wanted justice, he couldn't rely on the HOA. He'd have to find another way. Not everyone bought into Karen's lies. Quietly, neighbors began to approach Daniel. Mrs. Alvarez, an elderly widow across the street, confessed she had seen Karen lurking near his driveway at odd hours. Another couple whispered that Karen once threatened to find them over the shade of beige on their shutters. They admitted they admired Daniel's courage, but fear kept them silent. This divide ran deep. On one side were the fearful families who obeyed Karen's every whim to avoid trouble. On the other were the resentful those who despised her control but lacked the strength to oppose her. Daniel felt torn between gratitude and frustration. Why wouldn't they speak up publicly? Why should his family bear the weight of resistance alone? But he also saw something shift. The whispers revealed cracks in Karen's facade. Her power wasn't built on loyalty, it was built on intimidation. If enough people realized that, her reign could crumble. Still, whispers weren't enough. Daniel needed undeniable proof, something no one could twist. Until then, Karen still ruled. Karen sensed Daniel's defiance and responded with venom. Days later, animal control showed up at his door after an anonymous complaint claimed his dogs were dangerous. The officer left after finding nothing, but humiliation stung. Next, his mailbox was smashed overnight, jagged edges bent and useless. The pattern was clear. Karen was escalating, daring him to break. Even at HOA meetings, she used subtle digs mocking his lack of community spirit, painting him as the villain. Some neighbors laughed nervously, others stayed silent. Daniel's patience frayed. His family tiptoed through daily life, waiting for the next attack. Every slammed car door, every late-night rustle outside made him tense. It wasn't just harassment anymore, it was psychological torture. And Karen thrived on it. One evening, Daniel found his youngest son crying on the porch. "Dad," the boy whispered, "I don't feel safe here anymore." The word shattered him. It wasn't about Karen's petty power anymore, it was about his family's peace. For the first time, Daniel considered moving, selling the house, leaving the nightmare behind. But then he looked at the fear in his son's eyes and felt something shift inside him. No, running wasn't the answer. This was their home, their driveway, their street. Why should they surrender it to a tyrant? Rage hardened into resolve. If Karen wanted war, Daniel would give her one, but with truth, not fear. Daniel poured his energy into preparation. He installed hidden cameras around the driveway, high-resolution lenses disguised in garden lights. Motion sensors alerted his phone at the slightest movement. He began a meticulous log, dates, times. Every strange incident recorded. Weeks passed with nothing but tension. Karen grew bolder, smirking across the street, certain she was untouchable. Then, one night, the alerts buzzed. Daniel rushed to his screen and froze. There she was, Karen, crouched in the dark toolbox beside her, laying down fresh spike strips. The footage was crystal clear, her face illuminated by the faint glow of a streetlight. His heart pounded. Finally, undeniable proof. At the next meeting, Karen began her usual tirade about Daniel's rule violations, but he stayed calm. Without a word, he placed his laptop on the table and pressed play. Gasps filled the room as Karen's image flickered across the screen. The footage was undeniable, her hands placing the spikes, her face caught in the act. Murmurs swept through the neighbors. Karen's face paled, her voice stammering excuses about protecting the community. But no one believed her anymore. For the first time, the room turned against her. Daniel didn't gloat. He simply said, "This is what we've been living with. This is what she does." Silence followed. Karen's reign was cracking. Daniel took the evidence straight to the police. Officers reviewed the footage, nodding grimly. That evening, patrol cars rolled into the neighbors gathered on lawns, phones recording. As officers knocked on Karen's door, she emerged, indignant, shouting about conspiracies. But the cuffs clicked anyway, steel glinting under porch lights. Gasps turned to whispers, whispers into cheers. The woman who once wielded power with fear now stood humiliated in front of everyone, dragged away by law enforcement. Daniel watched, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. Justice had finally arrived. With Karen gone, the neighborhood began to breathe again. The HOA restructured, her allies retreating into silence. Families who once hid behind curtains now waved freely. Daniel's kids rode their bikes down the driveway again, their laughter breaking the silence that fear once ruled. Mrs. Alvarez stopped by with cookies, thanking Daniel for standing up when others couldn't. The young couple who once whispered now volunteered for the new board, determined to keep things fair. Slowly, trust returned. It wasn't perfect, scars remained, but the shadow of Karen's rule was gone. And with it, the cul-de-sac began to feel like home again. On a quiet evening, Daniel sat on his porch, watching his children chase fireflies. The driveway, once a place of sabotage, now stood repaired and safe. He thought back on the months of fear, the humiliation, the doubts. It wasn't just about spike strips or damaged tires. It was about courage, about refusing to let fear dictate his family's life. Karen thought she controlled the neighborhood, but the truth proved stronger. Daniel smiled softly, the weight finally lifting. This was their home, and no one, not even Karen, could take that away again.